I'm going to give you an update in terms of what went on in Toronto's residential real estate market in the month of October. Usually in the month of October, you see more activity comparing to September based on seasonality norms. So let's see what happened. The chart you see here, the first slide, is to give us a sense in terms of the number of transactions comparing to last year. So we had overall 10% less transactions on the residential side comparing to October of 2022, mainly led by a decline in terms of number of transactions year over year on condos. We had 13% less transactions on condos and 7% less transactions on freehold properties. Comparing to September, as you can see on the left side, we did have more transactions, and it did result in a better list to sales ratio. I'll cover that later, but that was because of seasonality. Usually you see more properties being sold in the month of October because buyers are beginning to start to make transactions and decisions after they've seen what was offered in September and in October. Now, moving on, the next slide is comparing average sale prices to last year. So basically for condos, we were at the same level as far as average sale prices are concerned to October of 2022, and for freehold properties we were up by 6% for average prices. I don't necessarily find average prices a good measure to form an opinion on price movement, because sometimes you have bigger properties being purchased and then that could skew the results. So to solve for that, we look at index prices. So the next slide you see here is for single family properties in Toronto. Year over year, we were up by about 2% as far as MLS index prices are concerned, which to me is more accurate. And the peak of the market was obviously first quarter of 2022. Moving on, the next slide shows us the index price movement for apartments in Toronto. More or less, we're at the same level as last year, October, and which was the case for townhouses as well, as you can see from the slide. Moving on, this slide is showing us the number of properties being offered comparing to last year. So we had about 43% more condos being offered in the market. We had about 33% more freehold properties coming to the market comparing to October of last year. But to me, that was to be expected, because last year we had a historic low number of properties being offered. So that backlog of listings entering the market was to be expected. What was extraordinary, in my opinion, again, following the trend in September, was the disproportionate movement of sales comparing to the number of properties being offered. So I'll cover that. Moving on, the sales to listings ratio, which is a measurement of the temperature of the market. Last year we were averaging 52% for freehold properties in October. This year we averaged 36%. And for condos, it was even lower, for 25% sales to listings ratio, comparing to 41% for condos in October of 2022. Now, the sales to listings ratio did improve comparing to September, but as I said, it had more to do with the seasonality norms than the general movement of the market. And the next slide is showing us how many days it took on average for a property to be sold. So we had 32 days for a property to stay in the market on average in Toronto, which was a little bit lower than last year by about 3%. I would say on average it would take more time for a condo property to be sold versus a freehold property. Moving on, the chart you see here is to give us a perspective, a longer term perspective in terms of number of properties being offered. So on the right side you see, going back all the way 10 years, the linear trend line is very close to what was being offered in this year, October, in terms of number of freehold properties, 2,300 roughly 2,300, and then on the left side you see for the same graph for September, going back 10 years, and usually you based on seasonality norms, you get more properties being offered in the month of September, and then on the other side you will have more transactions in the month of October. So the next slide is showing us the number of transactions on the line below, and as you can see, those lines usually move proportionately, except for this year. So it was very disproportionate, very much below the linear trend line as far as number of transactions for October versus the years prior, and then which resulted in the next slide, which is the sales to listings ratio of 36% in October. Again, I went back all the way to 2013. We were always hovering about 50, 60%, even 80% in 2021 in Toronto freehold properties as far as sales to listings ratio. So anything above 50%, in my opinion, would constitute a very strong seller's market. Between 40 to 50% would be balanced / seller's market, and below that at 36%, that to me is a clear signifier of a shift in the market being more in favor of a buyer because they have more options. The only challenge is that buyer going to be able to afford the cash flow? So it could be more of a stagnant market as opposed to a buyer's market, because yes, there are more properties available to choose from, but then we are in a very high interest rate environment, and that's also having an effect. And moving on, the chart you see here is giving us an overview, a moving average for three key metrics. As I said, sales to listings ratio was 34% in the month of October. Compared to the past 30 days, it was an improvement of about 16%, which to me makes sense because you usually get more properties being sold in the month of October. So to me, in my opinion, that had more to do with seasonality norms. We averaged 4% lower in terms of average sale prices compared to September, and ask to sell ratio, which is a measure of how far from our asking price should we expect to get a property to get an offer for the last 30 days. The ratio was basically 1% below asking price, which was slightly higher than September numbers. Moving on, and the chart you see here is the same concept for condo listings being offered in the month of October going back 10 years. As you can see, we had a very low number of properties being offered last year. Naturally, that backlog of sellers entered the market. We had about 3,700 properties on the condo side being offered in October. What was extraordinary again was the number of transactions. Those two lines did not move proportionately, so we had about just shy of 900 transactions on the condo side for Toronto in October, which resulted in a sales to listings ratio of 25%, which again is a clear indication to me that this is an environment that is more favorable to a buyer. I would say a buyer's market, because they basically have more options to choose from, and that's usually a leading indicator for price. Moving on, you see here on this slide the moving averages for condo properties, 23% sales to listings ratio. Average prices were down by about 2% comparing to last month, and you basically can expect to have an ask to sell ratio of 1% above asking price. Moving on, real quick on this slide, I want to cover the average rent prices for Toronto as a whole. So October was the fourth consecutive month that we had a decline for average rents across Toronto. I think that number is mainly being driven by a decline in terms of average rent prices for condos, not for freeholds, and it's a combination of two things in my opinion. One could be some of the properties, especially condos that are being offered for sale, if the owner can hold on to the property, they choose to rent it for now, and that creates more inventory entering the market for rental market, as well as more house completions on the side of condominiums for sure entering the market, so you get more supply. So as you can see, the sales to listings ratio, which is an indication of how much of an inventory is being purchased in the market, whether it's rent or sale, we averaged 47%, which is about a 20% reduction if you compare it to the same 30 days period in September. So that to me signifies that more inventory entered the market in the rental market, and that resulted in downward pressure for prices, in my opinion, mainly driven by condos again. Anyway, to say that the general updates, especially for Toronto updates that I provide, usually are to give us a sense in terms of the sentiment of the market. I wouldn't necessarily use this information to form an opinion on a specific property as far as value is concerned. I hope you find the information helpful. Take care.